Hello and welcome to Mondays on Tuesdays podcast. It has been a minute. I think I haven't recorded in like a month or something. I um I have the same reason most people have for dropping something for a period of time, which is something a kitchen manager said to me at one point. He said, "Life is lifing." And I would definitely say that life has happened in a massive way in the last month or so. One of the things that happened, you will notice I sound a bit different, probably not ideal. My microphone broke. Yeah, it's gone the way of the garbage heap. And it was a product that I've had many products from this headphone and headset company. Everything breaks in 2 years for me, and their sound quality is just so amazing that I put up with it. And that's a trade-off I made, and it bit me at a particularly interesting time. I also really have made my way back into the restaurant industry, which is just wonderful. Having the confidence to cook the food in parallel in ways that are impressive to, the people managing the shift, the chef, and just really kind of have gotten my stride. It's such a wonderful feeling to feel like I have a skill set and an occupation I can take wherever I need to be. I've cut my lifestyle back so far by necessity through the months of unemployment and ups and downs that it's actually a sustainable living, which is its own remarkable accomplishment given how low restaurants pay and how high my lifestyle was when I was a software engineer. What I'm going to talk about today on the podcast is the idea that in terms of policy, in terms of approach, I don't actually think we're that far off from having a really great society. And that's a very confusing thing to say, given how badly things have fallen out of the sky and how, divided people are emotionally, religiously, spiritually, politically, opinionally. It really feels like people are at their throats. The gap between the rich and poor is widening to disastrous and potentially violent ends. And yet, the analogy I would use is if you tried to travel a long distance and you were only a few degrees off with your compass, you could end up very, very far away. You could even miss your destination and just keep going. And I think that's the analogy I would like to use today, is that in terms of financial policy, in terms of societal attitude, in terms of job hunting and how to go about business, in terms of, I don't know, how to treat people, what dignity means, what respect means, what justice means. I don't think we're that far off, and I'll talk about the things that I think it would take to build a society today and have a future society that we all want to actually live in. And I think that the magnitude of the situation we're seeing is because that few degrees off has gone on for a very long time. But I really, really think that it's actually a few simple things that would put everything back on track, start the healing process, get us all to a better place. And I will also say that this gap that was somewhat enforced on me, somewhat demands of my time, somewhat, a broken recording device, it could not have happened at a better time because I was feeling for a while that the Mondays on Tuesdays podcast it needed a reset because I was getting so critical about stuff and all about explaining the negatives, and if we just knew what the negatives were. And I've noticed that the podcasters that I'm personally listening to has changed a bit, and it's moved from people who talk about current events and how terrible they are to people who talk about kind of like a spiritual and emotional kind of renaissance of the soul of America and possibly the world, this idea of DIY culture coming back. What does decency mean kind of coming back? And I really have this deep, deep perspective that people need help and support more than pressure. Pressure seems to solve problems because people figure things out, but really people need help and support, and that can alleviate, the bad behavior from forming next time. So back after the break, got a few speculative things to talk about. So I want to do something I rarely do on this Mondays on Tuesdays podcast adequately, which is lay out the topics that I'm going to talk about. I've listened back to a few episodes that I like say the four things, and then I talk about three of them and move on. And that's partly because numbers have a very, strange way of arranging themselves in my mind. But this episode has a real specificity in that I want to talk about banking and financial regulation and structure. And I want to talk about uh, business culture and how to make sure that businesses form sustainable relationships with time and with their communities. Um, and then I want to talk about human decency and respect and how that can be something where, generally speaking, people know what's what in terms of human decency, kindness, and respect. And we're not in this situation where it feels like kindness and kind people are few and far between, and society kind of actually encourages and reinforces a level of brutality. So for the first one, in terms of banking, I will say that I have nearly completely lost faith in all economists. And the reason is very simple. Anyone who thinks that the job report in America is worth paying any attention at all to, in my opinion, is not a very detailed economist. And the reason is very simple. That jobs report is a random survey that is then revised months later in the age of computers and in an age where most states are collecting tax revenue from payroll 14 days after payroll is run. So we have the numbers to know who is employed this month. We and yet we have this weird, oh, the estimates from a few months ago. And if you believe that, you just don't have that detailed of a picture of how the economy is moving. So I think we can just accept right now, without going in detail, that economists are either not that bright or lying to us. So basically, economics comes down to the idea of how does money move around. And one of the things that money really has to solve is the chicken or the egg problem of liquidity, meaning what do you do when you need more money than you have, but you can use that money to make more money at a future time? I'll give you an example. You need a house to live in so that you can live close enough to go to work, but you don't have the money to buy a house. And so if you split that into a mortgage that is regular payments, you can afford to live in the house, you can afford to get to work to make money, to spend more on the house than the house is worth, and that's the interest payment that goes to the bank. And now, in theory, the bank's making money too. And so liquidity is this idea that you will inevitably, in your financial life, every business, every person will have to dip below zero. When you make a comfortable living, liquidity can be confusing because it could be deciding to go on a less expensive vacation when you need to cut back, going to different restaurants or going to restaurants less. When you're flat up broke and unable to pay your electric bill, as I have been, liquidity becomes very static and harsh. We have very painful weeks at a time sometimes where we have barely enough groceries to survive. The food isn't wonderful. And that's an idea of when liquidity breaks down, when you don't have the flexibility to receive the support you need to do something that you need to get more support. So the banking world was always framed as solving this kind of problem, right? We give businesses loans so they can continue operating, so that they can employ people like you. But the problem with that is, I believe, based on the numbers I have, that if we actually saw how businesses are borrowing, they would not look like the uh, profitable uh, thought leaders of decent work that they present themselves to be. They would look more like a very reckless household. They would look like a household that is constantly remortgaging their house to pay for stuff they don't really need, constantly racking up credit card bills that they have no hope of actually paying down, losing a whole bunch of money on interest. This is supposedly the case behind most private equity firms and venture capital firms. It's not actually their money, it's bank loan money. And then there's leverage buyouts where people will replace the leadership team and then place the bank loan in the name of the company. So they basically just place a company in debt to a bank of their choosing. So these kinds of things where people running large sections of the economy and making really important decisions who actually have very bad financial hygiene. It's one of the ideas of like one of those degrees that's kind of gone off the mark, and it's taken us to a very bad place because as we saw from the 2008 crash, there's so much recklessness in the financial world. And so to me, it's not a huge adjustment to say, uh, I think we should pay attention to who we respect. I think we should look at who is running businesses well. And if that's not the case, we should leave and go work for people who are. And that's like a small thing. Now, this has to be followed up not just by increasing transparency in the sort of borrowing measures of the businesses we rely on, but also people with a lot of talent in figuring out how to transformatively increase wealth and provide services and not just like buy an existing business and squeeze it. We can need more people like that starting companies. So it's both the sort of a introductory build something layer and also the um, let's really have a closer look at who is actually constantly running behind financially and just be honest that they're, you know, they're not made for this moment. We'll say that. Um, and then the next thing that I want to talk about in terms of business culture is that my entire career has been filled with a very long history where people are much more concerned with their reputation or their reputation within the business and just not that really interested in how things are made. And I think the reason for this is that capitalism has this really nasty habit of placing decisions in the hands of people who are very comfortable and potentially past their prime. And I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about the idea that when you are gritty and hungry and you have perceived a problem in the world or a problem in your business, you come up with a solution and it makes a big impact. And then, because of that big impact, if it's recognized, which oftentimes it's not, if it's recognized, maybe you get to own your business, maybe you get a prominent role in the business, and then you're not going to struggle reputationally and financially the way you used to. And slowly but surely, either you adjust well to these new circumstances or you don't. I mean, I've heard so many stories of celebrities that really genuinely struggled with their fame at first. Musicians who release a second and third and fourth and possibly for the rest of their career album that are just not that good because they've lost their edge. The interaction of feeling the pain of a situation and understanding the lack of something and the grieving is an ingredient in doing things well. And if capitalism continues to place decisions in the hands of people who have lost their edge, things will just continue to fall apart. I don't know exactly what to do about this because I've read stories that go back to Roman times where they had a dysfunctional aristocracy class that had too much wealth. And that was a few thousand years ago. I mean, the history of capitalism is a boom and bust history. It is a people, you know, meet the moment, do amazing things, and then all of a sudden, in massive ways, they just stop meeting the moment, everything collapses. And that's capitalism. Capitalism is a boom and bust philosophy. And I don't really like the idea that it's the, you know, we need to pick an ism. I'm not like oh, there's three buckets, you're capitalist, socialist, or communist, and that's it. I think that isms themselves is the idea that the paradigm has become a theology and it has become so bad that it is an ideology. And so I think a discussion about raw economics that doesn't talk about whether or not funding transportation to increase the economy is socialism or is supporting tax revenue or is supporting the ability of businesses to hire people, which is capitalism. I don't think it's that important to label things within the ism. I think it's just like bring back common sense kind of a thing. So that's what I would say in the business community is we somehow have to figure out how talent and ability can speak louder than privilege and history. And when you learn from history, it's great. When history becomes a legacy that you don't learn from, it's not so great. And I will say that I these days I don't separate the world into the wealth class and the working class. I separate it into the talent class and the capital class. And when I say talent, I'd like to clarify what that word means because I'm really talking about a talent that must be polished and honed and like a craft. It's not just like, oh, they were born smart, they're always going to be smart because you gotta sharpen the tools, it's a developed ability kind of talent that I'm referring to here. And then the third thing is I am very proud of America for being less violent than people thought we would be at this point. For a country with lots and lots of guns, it's a very sad thing to say we don't have that many more gun deaths than we usually do because we have just such an ugly, gross amount of, public shootings, school shootings, domestic violence shootings. I mean, really, we're naturally a pretty violent country, but interestingly, it doesn't look at this time, a year into Donald Trump's second presidency with all the crazy things that have happened or that his administration has done, there hasn't been the, revolutionary descent into violence. And I'm starting to feel like I don't think there will be. And the reason is that I think violent revolution really scarred the beginning of this country, and then the revolution or the Civil War again. It was like we went to violence again. And when I look at what happened in both of those cases, is that it didn't really move us into a sustainable society. And I think this like last degree that I would say would be a really good idea to take in is the idea that people are screwing up not because they want to, it's because they're desperate. People who push around a bunch of meaningless numbers and make a bunch of terrible decisions, I think they've become obsessed with greed because they have nothing else to hold on to. They would rather actually be successful. It's just they've gone so far off the rails that that's not an option for them. And choosing between failure and greed, they've chosen greed. But choosing meaningful contribution, they totally would. It's just the infrastructure is so broken that that's not in the cards for most of us. And I think those three things, understanding that kindness, support, and nurturing are actually the things underneath really fixing things, and a business culture that rewards actually good decisions instead of performatively good decisions, and a financial culture that has an understanding of liquidity as something that needs accountability on the other end of whether or not the sort of overall balance going below zero did actually come back in the end to become something, or was it just a constant strain of maxing out credit cards and refinancing loans, which in the business world is a constant stream of layoffs and leveraged buyouts and venture capital injection and expanding the stock pool to raise money on Wall Street. And all of these things are basically signs of business not being done well. And I think that without really diving into accounting in the public sphere, this goes under the radar. But I think society is actually not that far off from a society that we would all love to live in. I think it's just a few degrees off, and I think those are the three factors of the degrees. I think it's just been running for a long time. And I'm not talking about a long time like 50 years. I'm talking like the boom and bust of capitalism dates way back thousands of years. So I hope that I can frame this podcast to be much more inspiring. I hope this was somewhat inspiring. It was a bit dark. Um, and I definitely will get better recording equipment so I sound better hopefully soon because while I tested out the recording equipment before I recorded this and I'm confident that it's at least listenable, uh, I'll make it sound better soon. Till next time, if you need to find information about me, There's a whole bunch of stuff about my project at comparebasic.com, and I will record one of these again soon.